Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I think Tuesday is the only day that didn't have a little tick in it. We've never had I don't think we've had a pod on a Tuesday, and obviously that's an itch that producer guys have been wanting to scratch for some time because we have a special interview today. I've been very rude, Kieran. I haven't asked how you are because normally we do this straight after doing the week's news pod, but we're doing it before the week's news pod. So I'm all discombobulated. How are you, Kieran? How was your weekend?
The weekend was busy, I think, is the politest way of describing it. But yeah, all good. Still coming to terms with the loss in the Ashes. Australia were the better team, by the way. But yeah, I think if you take away Ben Stokes' innings, but putting the less into classless. Alex Carey and co.
Yeah, very good. I'm happy to say it wasn't cheating, but it was gamesmanship of the worst order. But also, just as a stroke of luck here, and obviously we recorded yesterday morning. No, so it's Tuesday now. We recorded Sunday morning. I was at one stage going to introduce the pod with an anodyne reference to the Ashes. Just went, oh well, another game's gone. So that nothing would have said pre-recorded more than mentioning the Ashes. I was at a big cricket game on Sunday. I happened to go to Surrey versus Essex.
Right.
And I didn't see any of the first innings because, like most people, I was glued to my phone to see what was happening down the road. But my abiding memory is of a stag do. And first of all, if you're going to have a stag do with 20 of your mates dressed as ballerinas, I don't think Sunday afternoon is a time for it, to be perfectly honest. Unless they've gone through the night. But they spent the entire game just singing Aussie, 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 cheat, cheat, cheat. Which seeing 20 men in various states of inebriation, all dressed as ballerinas, was one of the reasons that we love cricket. Anyway, our interview today, Kieran, is it's a more important subject than the levity with which we've introduced it, I'm afraid to say, because we're talking about a club that we've been mentioning far too often recently, Kieran, a club that started with the pebble of a story 8, 9, 10 weeks ago, which has become an avalanche. We're talking about Reading FC, and we spoke to Paul Mann from the Reading fan group Sell Before We Die, which is campaigning for a change of ownership at the club. And this is what we had to say. Paul, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I don't often get to say this to people I interview, but I really rather I wasn't having to interview you, to be perfectly honest. I've not met you. I'm sure you're lovely, but we meet in unfortunate circumstances. But before we talk about what's happening at your football club, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been a Reading fan.
Hi, yeah. I've been a Reading fan since 1985, and that was a really, really bad season to pick as a Reading fan in many ways, because we started off with breaking the Football League record for 13 consecutive wins at the start of the season. Yeah. And, oh, dear. It's been a bit of a mixed bag since then. We've obviously been up and down. We were in Division 3 then, up to Division 2. Then we hang around in the Championship for a while. Then we've been in the Premier League a few times. And now it's not great. It's not great. We're back to where we actually began as a Reading fan. And it's just been difficult, Kevin. Really, really difficult.
I imagine it has. I mean, Kieran and I both have fond memories of the old Elm Park. But while Elm Park was there, we could look at Sellers Park as not being the shittest ground in the league, which was great. And, of course, all three of us have Steve Coppell in common. But I think most people, Paul, would look at Reading recently and say it's been a good story. But tell us what the current situation is now, though, in terms of HMRC, points deductions, non-payment, etc. It's a long list, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the fact that we've even got that list is just, it's horrendous. I mean, the biggest issue for me is obviously you've got the tax issue, which is absolutely scary. That's the third time that petition has come up to our owner, Dai Young, and his time that he's been the owner of the club, which is now 6 years.
Yeah.
That's not a good sign straight away. But the fact that you're not paying the staff, it's just horrendous. Football players, they earn a hell of a lot of money. Well done. Good luck to them. I've no issue with that. That's all legal and everything. But it's the normal members of staff that I really worry for. And we have contact with some of them, and other members of our group do as well. And I worry for them massively, because if you're doing a job, you should be paid. And once you're reaching that point as a football club, you're deciding that you're either going to pay the wages or not your tax. This is just a dreadful situation. And it feels like we're drifting slowly, inevitably, hopefully not, but into administration at some point. I hope I'm wrong there, though.
The staff thing is the one that upsets us most as well, because as we've discussed around other clubs, particularly Wigan recently, 80% of the people that work at your football club will be Reading fans. That's what upsets us most. It's the fact that you're taking advantage not only of your staff but also of fans. Before we discuss this in more detail, Paul, let me just bring in Kieran quickly. Kieran, in terms of the HMRC petition, what's the latest on that? Do we know? And do we have any idea yet what the figure is that they're talking about in terms of unpaid tax?
We don't have the figure, but I believe that Wigan was around about £2.5 million, and Reading had a higher wage bill than Wigan. So it's likely to be a substantial amount. We also saw in respect of Derby County, that was well over £20 million, but that was a long charge sheet in respect of Mel Morris and the way that he chose to run the club. It's likely to be significant, as Paul has said. It's not a one-off, and I suspect we weren't aware until somebody very kindly sort of gave access to sort of a bit of history that there had been petitions before from HMRC. And they hadn't gone any further. So what we have now as a petition is effectively HMRC saying, we've got fed up of the lack of payment. We're giving you effectively an official legal warning with the potential of it going through the court system. And what is likely to happen, given what we've seen at Southend United, is that I suspect there will be a miraculous payment the day of the hearing. And I think the day of the hearing is not for a few more weeks yet. So it's a case of watch this space. But of course, every day that outstanding tax issue is in existence, then Reading are yet again in breach of the embargo rules, which means that they cannot sign players. And they've got a pretty long charge sheet. In fact, they are the only club out of the 72 at the EFL who are up on the list of embargo clubs, which doesn't reflect well on the owners. I think it's really important to separate owners from football club as well.
Yeah, of course.
In the court of social media, which we all know, it's a cheap shot from other fans. You don't support a club because the owners are good or bad. You support the club because you love the club. So that's where we are. It's not a good situation. Players not being paid, HMRC not being paid, makes you wonder who else is not being paid.
Yeah, Paul, the transfer embargo is particularly worrying because I understand that if the season were to start tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to field a team, would you?
No, we'd have to put out a team full of academy players. I mean, on the embargo front, we haven't actually signed a player for a fee since 2020 August.
Really?
And that was Obi Ajaria. That's how badly run the club has been during this tenure of Dai Young. I mean, it's just absolutely damning. I mean, I can't see how we managed to actually stay in the championship for so long under embargo. I mean, I can, because I can mention Kieran Jarcham and the links that we have with him.
Yeah.
But it's a real problem and a real worry. I don't know if we're going to come out of it now after these latest breaches. Probably unlikely.
What interests me, Paul, is Sell Before We Die was launched on the 21st of June. I almost wonder why it took you so long. But was there a straw that broke the camel's back that eventually led to fans getting together and say, nobody else is sorting this out, we have to do it?
Yeah, totally. And we actually, I have a site called Down Park Rolls, and another one, Club 1871, actually organised a protest about 18 months ago at the stadium. But this one's going to be much bigger because it's got all the Reading fan sites in there, ones associated with the club as well, as in Star. Yeah, there was an event that happened. What happened was there was another EFL listing on the embargo for non-payment of loan fees.
Right.
And then,
okay.
Yes, and then there was the non-payment of staff wages, and that's what tipped it over the edge. I believe everyone thought that's just enough. And the thing is about Dai Young, the lot of the supporter base actually still backed him right up until that point. And it is quite amazing when I think about it. It really is incredible. But they were blinded by the fact that he spent so much money. It was financial blackmail, essentially, that they look at the training ground and they look at the amount of money he spent, but they look at where he's put us and what that money has done. It hasn't been good. He's completely disrespected the club and its long-term future.
I want to come on to that idea of financial blackmail later on, especially in terms of what one of your previous owners said recently. But it's really interesting you talk about the fans being behind him, because you've kind of second-guessed my next question, was because your press release said that Mr. Dai's stewardship had been, and I quote, an unmitigated disaster, but also acknowledged that Reading fans had, and again I quote, been supportive of him. So was there a time when he first came into the club that it looked like he was going to be the good, responsible owner that you needed to stabilise you in the Championship and move you up again?
Well, I think probably what it is he's got that magic word, hasn't he? Billionaire. And as soon as he comes into a football club, I mean, let's be realistic. That's what football fans think of straight away, isn't it? It's money, money, money.
Yeah.
And they don't realise that actually you'd be much better off maybe with someone with less money, but actually cares. I mean, yeah, they thought when he came in, because it was such a weird situation, because the deal was actually agreed during our 2-1 win over Fulham in a playoff final at half-time. And it was announced immediately afterwards, after you go through EFL process after that, obviously, to be confirmed. But yeah, I think initially a lot of people thought he would be the right person. He came in, he spent money, but it was an incredible amount of money. But then after that, in the second year, he went absolutely, crazy with money. And football fans always blundered by, big transfer fees, and they didn't work out. His link with Kieran, which I mentioned before, it hasn't worked out. It just, as an owner, I think a lot of people have kept faith in him because of the amount of money spent, the training ground, which is amazing. But the problem is he actually owns the ground now. And this is another problem which has crossed many different clubs around the country, is they end up with a situation where they don't actually own where they play. Which what happens then when another owner comes in? It's just a real mess. Yeah,
well, also dissuades other owners as well. You mentioned the link with Kia a couple of times. Can you just elaborate for the listeners who don't possibly know about that, what that link is?
Well, his link is that he's officially a close friend and an ally and an advisor. But there's more going on. That's all I can say about Mark, about the situation of Kia Jarcham at Reading Football Club. It's his involvement with transfers over the years. He's brought in some amazing players, his links. There's no doubt. You look at someone like Emi Martinez, he was an incredible signing for Reading. I mean, you look at what he's gone on to do. But it means that the club has absolutely no long-term planning on its transfer, its structure. So you have players that come in. You never get any players that you sell for more than what you buy for. And you can't run a club like that. So Kieran Jarcham is a major problem, and another person who is an issue at the club. There are others, but we can come into them.
And does he have an official role at the club?
No, he does not have an official role. So it's very, very tricky.
Okay. Yeah. While all this has been unfolding, and unfortunately it's unfolding rather rapidly at the moment, has there been any communication at all between young Dai and the fans?
No, we have not heard from Dai. We have not heard from him since he took over in 2017. Not a single word.
Not a word?
No, I've never heard him speak. Nothing from him. No, everything that we've had would be from the incumbent CEO, which at one point was Ron Gourlay.
Yeah.
And now it's Dai Yongpang, who's been there since 2020. And Dai Yongpang put some statements out, but Dai Yongpang, another person, no, there's no communication at all. And that is such a big underpinning issue at Reading. And there's been nothing from him at all. The club will justify, I've been to meetings with the club, and they will justify it, and they will say, that other clubs do this. Their owners never speak. And I understand that. They don't have to speak all the time. I don't want to hear from all the time. It'd be very dull. But if you hear from them not once in 6 years, I don't think that's normal.
Well, it's not normal. It's also arrogance. One word for it. Rude is one word for it. It wouldn't happen in any other company. And also just the fact that he's not acknowledging that there is upset and discomfort. At least Wigan's owners acknowledged that people were going without money. This is why we still get angry, isn't it? I mean, it's not only the men's team that have struggled as well, Paul. I mean, the women's team and the academy have really suffered as well here, haven't they?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the women's team has now gone part-time. The women's team were really successful relative to the budget that they had. They were doing well in the WSL. But yeah, they've gone as well because he's completely pulled the funding on them. And the academy's lost Cat 1's status, gone down to Cat 2. We're yet to find out what's going to happen on that. That's been assessed as well. We'll see on that one. There's a lot going on with the academy and long-term funding, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, before I ask you some of the specifics about what your campaign is going to do and what realistically it hopes to achieve, I'd like to bring Kieran back in again. Kieran, in terms of new owners coming in, the fact that the club technically doesn't own the ground is obviously an issue, but what sort of valuation would you put at Reading at the moment if somebody was looking to buy a club, which you would imagine with its proximity to London, with its recent, not too far away history in the Premier League, would be an attractive proposition for any buyer, wouldn't you?
Yes, and part of the reason we're seeing so many American owners come into the game at present is that they perceive there to be bargains in the Championship and League One and so on, and you're only two years away from the Premier League, and that's where Reading are at present. With the ground, I think if we use sort of Derby as a benchmark, Derby went for around about 60 million, although that was always seen as being an inflated price. I think proximity to London, decent stadium, new stadium, so therefore the ability to leverage on the back of that, you'd probably be looking in the region of 30 to 40 million. Without the stadium, there's not a lot there. As Paul said, there's not a squad. You've effectively just buying the name of the club, and then you are beholden to the landlord. So I think it would have to be sold as a whole package, including the stadium. And Reading were one of the first clubs to go down the route of selling the stadium to another company owned by the owner in order to circumvent financial fair play. And if you look at the hit list of other clubs that have done that, we've got Sheffield Wednesday, who's had a points deduction, Birmingham City, who've had a points deduction, and Derby County, who've had a points deduction. So, it's normally a sign of the finances being pretty precarious to begin with.
Paul, one of your previous owners issued slightly conflicting statements the last few days. Sir John Medeski, who I believe owned the club for about 26 years and oversaw your most successful period, but he called for your current owner to be supported by the fans, arguing that he's put £200 million into the club in 6 years, so he deserves a chance to turn it round. But he also talked about CEOs not understanding the culture of Reading Football Club. Were you disappointed with his first announcement when he's backing the owner?
I'm not surprised he backed the owner. He does it publicly, but what he does privately is completely different.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Sir John has been absolutely legend at Reading. Like you just said, he gave us our most successful time, but I completely disagree with what he said about us backing the owner. There's absolutely no way. He's had his time. It's time for him to go. He's been an absolute disaster. Sorry, John, but you've had a nightmare there.
Well, also, it seems an odd argument to say, well, he deserves our trust because he's put £200 million into the club in 6 years, which on the face of it is a good thing, but you have to look at the financial disaster that is going at the moment. So really what Sir John Medeski is going to say, he's put £200 million in 6 years and wasted every single penny of it, essentially.
Yeah, basically. He's given us 3 years of embargoes We're set to break another EFL record by becoming the first club to have 3 consecutive seasons of point deductions. I don't think we should be celebrating this, John. I'm sorry, but you could put in £1 billion. That's still a disaster. There's no good way to look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, Kieran's made the point as well that you see Mashiri put £6 million into Everton and have almost the same effect. I mean, it's not as bad as Reading, but just pumping money into a club isn't always the way forward, which is disappointing, as you say. Brings us right back to the start of your conversation when the billionaire comes in and every single fan puts their feet up and says, well, that's it, Premier League in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's financial blackmail, as I mentioned earlier. That's what's been happening a long time at Reading. And finally, there will still be some Reading fans who still believe that it can be turned around, but I don't think at all.
And it's in terms of what Sir John said about the culture of Reading Football Club. Do you understand? Obviously, you understand what he means by that, and I find it's very difficult with the fans of any club, especially Kieran is a Brighton fan. It's impossible for him to explain the culture.
How does that
work? It doesn't. To be honest, Paul, it's on the surface it all seems serene. It seems like we're two swans just getting on with each other, but underneath it's chaos. To be perfectly honest, but could you explain the culture of Reading Football Club? Is there a particular? I mean, every club thinks they're unique, obviously, and that no one's been through situations like they have. But I think Matejski underestimates the culture of Reading and the fans if he thinks that protesting against something that's almost possibly going to ruin their club isn't part of the cultural DNA of Reading fans.
Yeah, I mean, the culture of Reading FC is the underdog. That's essentially what we are.
Right.
Yeah, we have to always fight, and we always have to prove our point, and we always have to be the outsiders. We're like on the edge, just on the edge of London. We're even further out than Crystal Palace. It's kind of like, it's hard to imagine, but we often get called like Londoners and all the other stuff that comes with that football games. But the culture of us is we have to be what we are. We're from Reading. We know we're not going to be the biggest club in the world ever, but we want to be proud of our team. We want to have something we can support, and we want something that's going to be there for the future generations. And at the moment, we don't feel that's guaranteed. And that's why we've set up our campaign, because he's actually slowly killing every part of the club. You know, the men's team's dying. The women's team's virtually gone. The academy's got worse. The future financial of the club is an absolute mess. We don't own the train. We don't own the stadium. There's nothing good. I can't see what is good about his ownership at all.
Well, also what's interesting when you talk about the culture, I mean, you mentioned Palace not really being in London. That's how we see ourselves. We're not a London club in the way that Arsenal, Chelsea and Spurs are. You know, we kind of brackets fancy Dan London club. But the football club is part of our identity. It's part of, I live in a part of London where 3 different boroughs sort of merge into each other. There's nothing distinct about it except for the club. And that's what gives me my identity. And in a town like Reading, where it's the football club that gels people together in a way, it's like that's what most people will think of when they think of the town of Reading. They might think of a certain comedian or whatever, but they'll hear about Reading, then people will go, well, why are they called the Biscuit Men and so on? And that people find out about the identity of a town through the football club. And I think Sir John has misunderstood that in his comments as well.
Yeah, which is quite amazing, really, isn't it? After being the owner for 26 years and spending virtually all of his life in Reading almost here. I find that incredible. I mean, it's just money. Unfortunately, the situation, it's just sad that someone who loves the club as much as he does, and he completely does, I have no doubt on that, he's just so blinded to the situation that we're in. I mean, maybe he just thinks that if he leaves, the situation will get dramatically worse. And it could quite easily. I don't want to raise fears for anyone about liquidation, but the situation is perilous. I really struggle to think of owners that would want to come in and buy us right now. It is tricky.
Well, listen, before we talk about the campaign, let me just bring Kieran in on the back of that. Kieran, this sounds like an awfully ghoulish question to ask, but how perilous is the situation, Kieran, using your skill and your experience? I mean, we always pray and hope that administration, liquidation are not on the cards, but what do you think the situation, the outcome of this is going to be?
I don't think it's be liquidation. Right. Reading are too attractive a proposition to a prospective owner. given all of the positives that we've already said, solid fan base, new stadium, proximity to London, airports, all of that makes it attractive. Administration has got to be seen at a risk, because you start off by not paying the players, then you follow it up by not paying the tax. If you've not got the cash to pay the next tax bill, and let's face it, we've just been through the June payroll, and I'm assuming that has been met, which is. You'd have thought that, I'd imagine Paul would have heard of that not being the case. So that is a positive. But there's not that many people to pay as far as the playing staff are concerned, going forwards. And that's a concern. How are you going to attract players as well over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks, when the club's reputation has been destroyed from a recruitment point of view by the owner? And I think that's my concern. But I don't see them as going out of business. I just fear administration, and that's a further 15 points on what we've already got to deal with.
Yeah. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about your campaign. Who's involved, and what have you got planned?
Our campaign is called Sell Before We Dai, and we've got lots of Reading FC fan sites involved, all the big ones. We've got the Tyler Stand, we've got Star, we've got Club 1871, we've got my own EPR. And I think our plan is to keep everything legal. We don't want to do condone or be involved with anything that's going to cause any legal problems for anyone. We want to create an action that forces the owner out of Reading FC. And we want to do it in a coordinated fashion with lots of different protests, which should be online, which should be in person, which should be advertising, which could be anywhere in the world. We want to basically embarrass the owner and highlight our situation to other people who haven't heard about it, because this is where we are now. We have to do absolutely everything as a group, and we can only do that with the support of Reading fans and the people of Reading, and also other fans who've been through this and other sides, because we accept, help from everyone, because we're learning. We're incredibly new. Yeah. We don't pretend to have all the answers to how we're going to do this, but we're going to try everything we can, and that's all we can do.
Playing devil's advocate here, Paul, which producer guys sometimes ask me to do, is there not a risk that forcing the owner out or embarrassing the owner out, however you put it, without the potential of somebody else coming in, is just as risky as what's happening at the moment?
It is, but the problem is that with Die Young, there is no possibility of it actually getting better. If someone else who knew was to come in, there's a possibility it could get better.
Right.
And that's where we are now. Yeah.
Do you get the sense that the town of Reading, outside the football community, are aware of the current difficulties and the importance of keeping the football club afloat?
I don't think enough. No, and that's why part of our campaign will be going into Reading Town Centre and trying to highlight it with flyers and posters, and just being present and there to talk about it, to highlight it to enough people. Because honestly, no, I don't think enough people are.
Okay, that's interesting. And what's the response been then from Reading fans in general? I'm still fascinated by the fact that you say there are one or two that are supportive of the current owner. That's incredible. So, but would you say in general, the vast majority of Reading fans are on your side here?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the vast majority of fans that we've seen or spoken to or heard from are completely behind it. They won't agree with everything that we do. That's always going to be the way we need to start any protest. But they agree with the concept, yeah. And it's time for him to leave, yeah.
Yeah, and just finally, you say it's a learning process, which of course it is. And if there's anything we can do to help here on the podcast, when I say me, I nearly always mean Kieran, because he's the one with knowledge and expertise. If there is anything we can do to guide you or help publicise you, but have you been formally in touch with the fans of other clubs at all?
Yeah, I think we have been in touch with a few so far. And it's all been very positive, but we're always open to new ones. Anyone who's got any advice they can give to us from their experience. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it out there in the last few years.
There really is. And unfortunately, every time one club solves their problems, another one pops up to take their place, which is depressing at the moment. But what's not depressing is I imagine many fans of clubs listening to this will be in touch to offer you help. Is there a specific planned demonstration around the ground coming up that we can point people in the direction of?
Yeah, we've got a friendly coming up against Sutton, and there will be a protest at that game. That's this upcoming Saturday. So I think that's July the 7th.
July the 7th. Okay, brilliant. All right. Well, I'm not sure if I'm doing anything Saturday. I might even go down. I might be a secret Sutton fan for the day and come and say hello. Paul, we wish you all the best. Again, I wish we hadn't had to interview you, and I really hope we don't have to interview you again, unless we get some good news and we can talk about what's happening there. But as I say, in the meantime, all we can do is wish you the very best and offer you our help and support and good wishes.
Thank you. Really appreciate your help and efforts. And we'll do our best.
I think, Kieran, as Paul said, it's one of those issues. Be careful what you wish for, because there you are a few years ago as a Reading fan. It's been a bit of an up and down time. You've been in the Premier League, you've left the Premier League, and then along comes this billionaire owner. And as you talk about clubs being blinded by the cheque, fans are blinded by the word billionaire.
Very much so. If you take a look at Reading's finances since he acquired the club, total revenue £53 million, total wages 114, and that's before you then start to factor in transfers as well. I thought Paul was refreshingly honest, and I think most fans secretly would say the same. Yeah, we like the idea of billionaires coming in. But the issue with a sugar daddy is that if you end up with a sugar daddy, at some point, potentially, you're going to have to grab your ankles. And that's what's happened here in terms of, the club has been well and truly shafted now by the owner. And people have lost significant, they've lost out. People haven't been paid. And those are the everyday members of staff. HMRC hasn't been paid. They have a responsibility. And I don't think the EFL really could have done much more than they have done, because if a billionaire comes in, shows you the money, you don't know whether or not they're going to keep up their side of the bargain and continue to pay the ongoing costs.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much else you could do with the fit and proper persons rules, are there? He ticked all those boxes, and he had £1 billion. So I don't think the EFL can really be blamed here. Although, again, we have spoken in the past about whether the EFL should have better checks to see whether these things could be headed off at the pass, so to speak. I thought where Paul was very honest as well was in admitting that there is a danger that you force the owner out without having a plan B, a new owner to come in. But he was quite open about the fact that the one thing they have to do is get rid of the current owner.
Yes, I don't really see there's much of an alternative. But until somebody comes in with the money, because it's an expensive business. Reading's broadcast revenue will have fallen by around about 80% in being relegated from the Championship to League One. And Paul said that he's amazed that they haven't been relegated until this season. Well, part of the reason for that is that there's been other clubs who have been up to financial chicanery, who themselves have had points deductions and themselves been relegated. And then it's conveyed that, and this isn't a good view. We've always said what happens on the pitch stays on the pitch, now Reading have joined that list of clubs that have had points deductions and been relegated into the bargain.
Well, it's really depressing as well when I asked Paul whether they were turning to other clubs for advice, and he said, well, there's a lot of them to turn to who've been through the same situation as us, which is, I genuinely do. When we started this pod, Kieran, end of 2019, I didn't think football's ills would have been solved by now, Kieran, but I didn't think they'd be getting worse. I genuinely didn't think at that stage that we would be talking about a succession of established historical football clubs that are going through these types of situations. It's just, and the fact is that Reading, as you say, it won't go into liquidation, please God. And in a few weeks' time, hopefully we'll be reporting that a new owner's coming in. But then another club will nip into the space and we'll be talking to somebody else from another fan group. And it's quite depressing, Kieran, isn't it?
It is. If we go back to when producer Guy introduced us to each other, And he said, yeah, my aim is to get a show out a week and get 20 minutes worth of material.
Yeah.
And I saw you looked at me, you didn't know me at the time, and I looked at you and go, well, that's a bit optimistic, isn't it? And now the very fact that we're doing three, this potentially we could have four shows going out this week. And we enjoy what we do, but it's an indictment of the game rather than a celebration too often.
Yeah. And I'll say one thing for Paul. It was very refreshing to have a guest who realises the difficulties that because you're more mature than I am, have as a Palace fan, being cheery with a Brighton fan on a weekly basis. Paul understood that, and I appreciate it. There's so many times we have guests on who don't seem to realise the underlying tension between us, Kieran. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to join them, that'd be very kind of you. And you could do so by making a small monthly contribution at patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye from the Holly and Phil of football finance.
The price of football. The price of football.